Very excited to have you here, George. Thank you for being with us.
I mean, thank you, and appreciate all the folks here from just around the world spending time, particularly when it comes to sort of AI and the future of AI at the Trailblazers Summit. So really appreciate this opportunity.
Awesome. I'm going to start with the most sort of question that has been on the top of my mind. What have you changed your mind recently on?
Yeah, I think the setup in terms of where my mind has changed, particularly in the last 18 months, you've actually sort of wrote out in slides very, very acutely. And I think it's something that, as an investor, as a builder for many, many years, most of what you just showed on slides was science fiction. Right? Literally 18 months ago, everything on those pages were science fiction. And I'd say, about 18 months ago, we started to see a big shift, right? And the shift was happening for two reasons. And some of it was like necessity is a sort of mother of invention, right? And so let me kind of give a little bit of background on what's happening with the foundation model builders themselves and where, called the emergence of reasoning came from. So the journey that a lot of the foundation model builders were on up to this moment was accumulating intelligence, right? Just continuing to use the next generation of models, GPT-3 to GPT-4, GPT-4 to whatever GPT-5 and the style of models that are emerging is. When GPT-4 emerged, it was effectively 1 trillion parameters in the model. It took 6 to 7 trillion tokens to train the GPT-4 model. 6 to 7 trillion tokens is about 20% of all of human knowledge accumulated on the web, okay? And so that was likely the most complex artifact creating in human civilization up to that moment. But there was a challenge from the moment that GPT-4 emerged, because as more generative content continued to pervade the web, I don't know if anyone's heard this term of like slop, continuing to pervade the web now in terms of how much content is no longer created by humans, there was less and less sort of unique content available for us to go from the 1 trillion parameter model to the next sort of 10x function, right? The 10 trillion parameter model. Why? Because there likely wasn't 60 to 70 trillion tokens to be able to train the next generation model from an intelligence standpoint. And so no one said that out loud, right? Because they're like, well, you don't want to get into this mode of slowing down the innovation of how the models themselves, the foundation models themselves were being built. But there was another vector to think about. If this was the vector of intelligence, there was this sort of vector of reasoning that no one really went down. And the vector of reasoning, Amit, is what you really sort of described, that we don't have to necessarily march down this pathway of like acquiring more intelligence. We could actually learn more from the intelligence and the information that we already have today. And the agent-based approach that we're now seeing is that we're having a longer form level of thinking and reasoning in terms of how our models are capable of behaving. And there were some tremendous breakthroughs that occurred in literally the last 18 months, and we're starting to see that with deep research. We're starting to see that with the O3 models. We're starting to see that with DeepSeek emerging as a model that was a domain-specific capability that combined a number of things together to create a lighter weight, more functional experience than, say, for instance, what the bigger foundation models were doing. All of this accumulated into this moment where you could now build these agents. And what I started to see was the pixie dust that was being put upon our SaaS applications up to this moment as like copilots that everyone could have little, fun little tools for AI suddenly changed into these fully self-reliant, self-autonomous, creative agents that could work and be deployed. And now we're seeing that with our investment in Instalily. We're seeing that with the underpinning of how much an agentic AI function like Crew AI is now starting to reimagine everything with RPA. We're starting to see that with a company like Relevance AI, who literally went in and reimagined the entire digital workforce for front office work, so that SDRs, BDRs, like content marketers, could literally have digital coworkers associated with how that work was being accomplished. And by the way, all of that was science fiction 18 months ago.
Yeah. That rate of change has been, even I reflect back on my operator days, both seems at times thrilling, but also times sort of very confusing. So, George, as you reflect back on your operator days and now as an investor sitting in the boardrooms, what's your advice for leaders in this room? Like, and the general questions I hear are build versus buy. How do I bring my talent along this ride? What's your advice to us in this room?
So there's a lot of folks in this room that have been at least working in the domains that they're working in as leaders in digital technology, software, within an enterprise, as well as potentially within technology companies for, my guess is at least 20 plus years, plus or minus, right? It's a pretty sophisticated room here. I think if you are that person, like literally stop presuming that you know the things you know. Like you have to start over with a very concrete view that the world is completely being reformatted and you have to go in with a beginner's mind. That's what I started to do coming in. And part of it, like I had to do that because look, I was a builder for many, many years and had never done venture, and it's been 5 years that I've been doing venture. So look, I had to come in with a beginner's mind in the middle of COVID to think about what venture capital looked like in doing early stage investments at a scaled out firm like Insight, which we had to think about it a little bit differently. So my sort of necessity around trying to think about this differently was because I was doing something very different, right? And that's what kind of pushed me to come back with a beginner's mind.
That change.
It forced that change. But that's happening everywhere right now, all at once. And I think if we come in and presume that it's just more of the same, I think we are in for a very lethal surprise, because the folks that are business leaders today that are now reimagining, reformatting how work gets accomplished because of what's in front of us, that is coming at it with a beginner's mindset, are likely the ones that are going to succeed for the next decade and beyond.
Very well said. And I really like your point about like having to go back to sort of that first principles, which is what I was trying to sort of urge the room in terms of build fast, because that's the only way you are going to get a sense, a working knowledge of this change of state. As you think about sort of the human capital in these teams and this sort of new emergence of AI co-workers with agency, what are some of the frontier adoptions you have seen that really work? You mentioned some of the great, like Crew AI doing great work on the horizontal side. There are some domain specific, like we are certainly vertical specific. How would you encourage people to really think about sort of that human capital outcome and preparing sort of their workforce for this change?
So if everyone's going to this conversation around AI and agents as a thought process of how do I just reduce the human capital in my workforce, again, you're going about this the wrong way, right? There likely might be a moment where the things that your organizations are historically doing on a rote, repeated basis gets reduced because of the introduction of agentic capabilities that we're now talking about. And that is a great outcome, that your rote, repetitive work in many of the sort of parts of your organization are literally just going to melt away. Now, that might change the number of folks that might be in your workforce, but ultimately, what you really have to think about is how you upskill and reskill the work that is happening in your organization. Because there is a moment here where any Global 2000 company who's going through this shift is going to have the combination of human and digital workers working together on problems. And let's advance this forward a little bit for a second. Today, the tech that's available to us from LLMs and agents thinks about 10x human speed. It's about right? Got the speed at which humans think, the speed at which tokens are generated today, it's about 10 times faster.
Yeah, neuronal, maybe megabytes per second.
Let's play this forward a second. What happens the moment that we have a set of models and agents that are now 100x faster than human thought? And by the way, let's play that forward another, moment. And what happens when, even if the intelligence doesn't increase, the reasoning increases and the speed of that reasoning, that it's 1,000 times faster. And then what happens when the moment that we have 1,000x faster speed of thought, along with not 10 agents, but 100 agents, and not 100 agents, but 1,000 agents, and not 1,000 agents, but 10,000 agents. And so both of those things are going to happen simultaneously. And we're not at a point where like we're just going to have the agents go do these things by themselves. We're at a point where we still have humans as well as digital workers being able to accomplish that work together. So the opportunity of our generation is to really think about what the upskilling of that work is for humanity. And I think if anyone goes about this and just says, yeah, this isn't a great opportunity for me to just like cut a bunch of costs, it might be, right, for the short term, but that is really not the point. The point is to go figure out how to transform how work gets accomplished. And that, we have all the tools that we will need to do that for our lifetimes, here and right now.
I almost call it the unskilling of those learned behaviors, right? Which we'll all have to go through as leaders to get to that point of reskilling as an outcome in doing this.
And how does that happen? You have to come at it with a beginner's mindset.
Yes, completely agree. I think we'll all end up being builders first, foundationally, compared to where sort of we assume the starting point is going to be, which is that as a leader, my work will get easier, which I always love, right? All the technology changes promised us that life is going to get easier. And here we are trying to figure out collectively AI in 2025, right? So one other thing that really strikes me is sort of this multimodality. And you have talked a lot about it, George, as a sort of creating this ambient layer around us. Would love for you to double click on that, because I think one of the most underappreciated, at least for me, if I reflect back on the first question I asked you, what I have been most surprised by is the level of sort of this multimodality now gaining traction. And whether Notebook LM was sort of our first experience last year, where you could have a personalized podcast, and so we showed you a variant of that. But now it's rapidly becoming VO model, and not just that, ability to see, so you can video in, video out, audio in, audio out. We are rapidly approaching AI agents not just as textual atomic units, but really speaking, observing the same way human beings do. I would love your thesis to be explained around that.
Sure. This will take just a few seconds of setup. So one piece of the setup, before I went to SAP and before I helped scale out Alteryx, I was employee 200 at Salesforce.com. That was about 25 years ago, right? That I was at Salesforce, and we were in the midst of a creation event at that moment that we didn't quite know that was happening, which was the scale of which an internet-based application and the cloud was going to emerge for enterprise use cases, and Salesforce was one of the first great manifestations of it. I think we're at a moment now where that metaphor of just having a web-based UI, clicking through on specific buttons, and a UI that's been sort of targeted for that for a good part of a quarter of a century, is likely again going to melt away. And the reason why it's going to melt away is because you put the pieces together of what's happening. You have the agentic sort of experiences that are in front of us today. You have the demo that you just showed of having your information being reconstituted as a podcast back to you, right? So you have much more opportunity to look at this from an image standpoint, a video standpoint, a sound standpoint. Like, these are ways that we're going to be conversing and interacting with our systems, even in the enterprise. And again, the capabilities of doing that are all here right now. So the world is going to move into this moment where we are no longer going to require all these like heavy rules to build our enterprise software. We're going to have more of these reasoning capabilities embedded into or imbued into our agents. And as our agents manifest themselves, those agents don't have to be these visible web forms that everyone clicks through. It can be much more ambient. And so my view is like there is going to be a massive change in the user experience, the UX of how all of this plays out, that doesn't look like a traditional click form that we see today. It probably won't look like, ChatGPT either. Let's be clear, right? So there's going to be more of this possibility of ambient systems that live and breathe and interact with us in a way that is much more natural as humans than clicking on web forms.
Yeah, I'm just looking forward to having an agent around me that really understands my 13-year-old. And
No, good luck with that. That's not happening anytime soon.
I'm gonna have them prepare a couple of mics for Q&A, but I have one last question before we shift into that. What's your hot take on AI that you have in 2025? I know it changes by the day, but what's your hot take right now?
Yeah, my biggest hot take, the thing that has sort of changed for me, is I went at a lot of my thought process around at least investing, say probably, again, 18 months ago, that all these little co-pilots that were going to merge with all these little big incumbents inside of enterprise software, that was going to be the next iteration of how this was going to play out. Thank goodness I did not put a lot of investment into that. I was always intrigued by, okay, what was next and what was happening beyond, which was all these autopilots that were emerging from all these next generation companies like yourselves, like what was happening with Relevance, like what was happening with Crew, like what was happening around Fastino building small language models. But I was really excited with the fact that there was this data substrate that was driving this, which actually drove Insight's billion-dollar investment into Databricks. So when we thought about this a little further, what we said was like, well, the data substrate on this matters more than anything else, because if you have high-quality data, you can get all of these other things accomplished. But if you don't, then you're out of luck. So let's look at an opportunity where data can drive this sort of autonomous future, and this autonomous future is less and less about these co-pilots being done by these, call it established institutionalized players in enterprise software. The next generation of software companies are going to really emerge through this agentic future. And so that is what is really surprising to me, because I don't think we were able to say that out loud. We didn't have a true view on that. We just kind of iterated through it. And as we now start to see this play out, the world is no longer going to be about the incumbents in software driving co-pilots. That is dead. And the world is moving towards these agentic systems. And more than likely, because of how much incumbency there is with the existing, software folks that have, dominated the last, call it quarter century, they may not be the ones that are creating the future that we're going to look forward to.
Awesome. This was a really fascinating conversation. I think we have time for one or two questions max. So we'll take one right there. Mars?
Hi, Amy Pascal. I'm Chief Marketing Officer and e-commerce marketer at Silver Jeans. And I wanted to ask you, how do we change our organizations to get ready for what you're talking about? I'm leading my team, doing kind of these pilots, and it just feels very slow. And just hearing you talk for the last 20 minutes or so, already I'm feeling like we're behind the 8 ball. So are there any AI solutions to help transform organizations to get ready for this? Do we need AI officers in-house? What do you recommend?
So I'm more of the mindset now that there might be some helpfulness of having some top-level leader inside the organization that's called your chief AI officer. But more importantly, this is just going to have to embed into how people get work done in all their functional areas. So I don't believe that this is a top-down only effort that your chief AI officer is going to be driving. As a head of marketing, you have a ton of opportunity and choices in terms of what great marketing tools look like. I mean, if you look at Jasper was an investment we made, right? It's like Jasper was one of the early challenged companies when it came to the emergence of the shift from GPT-3 to GPT-4, because what it was doing on a prosumer basis got literally like hit by a brick wall. But what did Jasper do? They went out and built all the workflows and all the capabilities that a chief marketing officer would need. And so today, Jasper is beloved by the CMO of Google, the CMO of Disney, the CMO of Salesforce. And so that gives you an understanding of, like, in every one of these areas, there are tools, capability, solutions that will help you. But I think along with that, I would just say, this is an opportunity for leaders to lead. And this is an opportunity for teams that are under leaders to also, come out and lead. And if you have folks that are historically been great leaders and they know what they're doing, they've been awesome at it, but they're not willing to have the mindset of change, they probably aren't your future leaders. And you're going to have to think about that next generation of folks that are willing to embrace this change, because the clock speed of what we're talking about here, I've never seen anything like this. And I've been at this for 30 years. Like the reason I started in this thing that I've been now doing for 30 years is about 30 years ago, I was studying for my MCATs as a junior in college, and I was at Cornell, which is where my undergrad was, and Mark Andreessen shipped the NCSA Mosaic browser. It was sent to all the supercomputing facilities at the same time. It was an alpha browser. I was working at the help desk, and I saw the browser, and I called my mom that evening, and I said, I'm not studying for MCATs. I'm going to go figure out what this is. And that's everything I've been doing for the last 30 years, right? It is moving as a clock speed 50x faster than that moment. And so, that's the thing that we all have to start to embrace, that willingness to, not only take that beginner's mind, says presume the clock speed is way, way faster than we've ever seen, and look for people in our organizations that are also willing to embrace that. Because, the folks that you may have relied on in your own careers to kind of build, your teams, right? Your core, your peeps, may not be the ones that will help you lead forward for this next decade.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for asking that question, Amy. We are at time, and we have a whole day of agenda in front of you, but big round of applause for, this is a very busy week for George. Thank you for speaking with us.
Appreciate it very much.
Yeah, this was fun.